this play, when Sophocles got very old, I think he was in his 90s, his heirs tried to declare him incompetent and mentally incompetent. And so he took, this is an old story, it's probably not true, it's probably apocryphal, but apparently they took him to court and tried to prove that he was not competent. And he brought as evidence of his competence Oedipus at Colonus. And the judge took a look at it and said, he seems competent enough to me. And so his heirs lost. I think your first impression when you read this play is that maybe they should have won, because it is a very strange play. Despite, now I'm going to run through the plot. The funny thing about the plot is the overwhelming impression that nothing happens in this play. That there's, and when it does happen, you don't know why it's happening, and you don't know what it is that's happening. So how does it work? Oedipus, who since the end of Oedipus Tyrannus is blind, comes to Colonus with Antigone. He violates sacred ground, and when he hears the spot is sacred to the Eumenides, he refuses to leave. The elders of Colonus, where he is, want to throw him out. See, everything does change. There was a podium here last week that had a nice flat place on the top where you could put your water glass. This one slants, so it's really, I don't know what it is, but okay. So he pleads his case, and when he suggests that he has something good to offer them, they refer the whole matter to Theseus, who is the king of Athens. Now, Ismene comes to bring word that Eteocles has usurped the throne and Polynices is bringing an army to regain it. Now, these are the sons of Oedipus, who we learn elsewhere, 7 against Thebes, a little bit of it from Sophocles and Antigone. 7 against Thebes is a play by Aeschylus. We don't know exactly what's going on initially in this play, but by the time we get to the end, we realize that there's supposed to be an agreement between them to alter the kingship in every year. And it's Polynices' turn. He's the elder of the two brothers. Eteocles decides to try to keep the throne, and Polynices brings a foreign army to Thebes to try to regain the throne. So Ismene has come to tell Oedipus about that, and also to announce that there's a new oracle, according to which Oedipus's presence is necessary in Thebes for the well-being of Thebes, and to tell them that Creon is on his way to try to fetch Oedipus back. So Oedipus sends Ismene out to do libations in order to purify his trespass on the sacred ground at Colonus, at which point Theseus comes and promises Oedipus sanctuary and a burial in Athens, and Oedipus promises some still unnamed benefit. Creon comes, asks Oedipus to go back. Oedipus says, not on your life. Creon seizes Ismene and then Antigone, at which point Theseus intervenes, has his men free them, and asks Oedipus to speak with Polynices, who's been discovered at the altar of Poseidon. So Oedipus goes to, Polynices comes, Oedipus rejects his offer of an alliance, and curses both of his sons. At which point Oedipus hears thunder, calls for Theseus. He reveals to Theseus that so long as he is buried in Athens, we don't quite know what that means, you'll see why, Thebes will never conquer, Athens, and therefore he tells Theseus to keep his burial place secret from everyone but Theseus's heir. At which point Oedipus vanishes miraculously, and at the end of the play, Antigone and Ismene return to Thebes to try to stop the war between their brothers. We learn in the beginning of the next play that they weren't successful in doing that. So what's really striking is that this plot has nothing like the power of the Oedipus Tyrannus. It's so supernatural, and so much remains unknown to us. For example, why exactly is it that Theseus takes Oedipus in? And so you could say everything turns on why Creon, Polynices, and Eteocles all want Oedipus, and we haven't got a clue. Even at the end of the play, you don't really have a clue. Maybe you have a clue about Athens, that for some miraculous reason, but we don't know why, as long as he's buried in Athens, they won't. I mean, it sounds like an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I used to use that as a contemporary reference, but unfortunately it's not anything like contemporary anymore. But I spent a whole year discovering Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I had sabbatical, and I was writing a book on Aristotle's Poetics, and it was, I was having a great time writing the book. Maybe not the best book I ever wrote, maybe it is, but it was the most fun to write because it was most filled with sort of sequential discoveries, and it was great. But nevertheless, I gave myself numbers of pages that I had to finish during the day. But when you enforce rules on yourself, it's hard because you don't actually have any penalties that you can give yourself if you don't meet your own expectations, except I did. At the time, it was Buffy the Vampire Slayer reruns at 5 o'clock every day on TV, and I wouldn't let myself watch unless I'd finished a certain number of pages. And it was great because I got the book done and I watched almost every day, and I just fell in love with the wit, the wonderful wit that I remember the last episode of the first season, they've staved off this onslaught of vampires, and it's just at their high school, Sunnydale High School. And I forget exactly the words, but one of them says at one point, what an ordeal, we made it. And then somebody says, yeah, just and went through the events of the day, and the guy who says it says, no, I meant senior year. And it's at that point that you had a sense that the whole thing, not just them, but the whole thing is saturated with this very clever imagery that's being used to talk in these silly, vampire-ish terms about all sorts of things that are going on in everyday life. Anyway, it's great. It's actually very clever. Somebody once asked me if I was going to write a book about, somebody actually has written a book about the philosophy of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I just hate stuff like that because I love the series, but I wouldn't, there's something almost ridiculous about writing about it. Anyway, okay, so where are we? We haven't got a clue what makes him so valuable. So the whole thing seems a little artificial. The problem for us then is to try to figure out what the significance is of where Oedipus is to be buried, independently of what we're told directly about it in the play, because directly we're not given enough. So apart from the oracle, you could say, what does it mean to bury and make the burial spot sacred of the man who killed his father and married his mother? What protection could that possibly offer? Because that's the way he sells it. And has this anything at all to do with the protection that comes from the admiration, the worship of Oedipus, which is made possible in tragedy. So you could say they're treating him in a very special way as though he points to something sacred. Well, that's sort of the position we're in when we watch the man who slept with his mother and killed his father, and we are meant to somehow admire him when we see the tragedy. So Colonus, which in Greek, it's interesting, the ambiguities here, it means hill. Colonus hill is a place outside the city where people see and hear the unspeakable things that they're not supposed to look at. Is this the theater? You sit on a hill and look at and see the unspeakable things that you're not supposed to do? Now, these are big questions for the whole play. Today, I want to look at the prologue and its peculiarities, and boy, there are peculiarities. And then a very quick look at the parados, the short chorus they sing when they come in. So let's look at the first lines. Be helpful to look at the first lines of the right play. Okay. I'm going to read my correction of Green's translation, which you don't even have. So let's go. Child of a blind old man, Antigone, what place have we come to? Whose is this city? Who will today receive the wandering Oedipus with the scantiest of gifts? It is little he asks for, and still less he gets. Yet it is enough for me. My sufferings have taught me to endure, and how long these sufferings have lasted, and my high breeding teaches me the same. Child, do you see anything, anywhere I could sit? Either on the profane places, babela in Greek, or in the groves belonging to the gods? Set me there securely, that we may find out where we are. We have come to be learners of foreigners from townsmen, to do as we are told. Antigone says, my poor suffering father, Oedipus, there are towers here that protect the city. They look to my eyes far off. This place is sacred, as I would guess. It's thick with laurel, with olives, and with vines. The nightingales are singing, thick-feathered, happily inside the grove. Here's a rough rock. Bend and sit down on it. This has been a long journey for an old man like you. Set me now in a place, watch over the blind man. I do not need to learn that now. Time has seen to that. Can you tell me where we are? Athens, that much I know, but not this place. Yes, Athens, every traveler has told us that. Shall I go and try to find out which place this is? Yes, child, if indeed there are people in it. So his first words are, child of a blind old man, Antigone. To what places, regions, choroi, have we come, or the city of what men? You see how strange a question the whole thing is. Does Antigone not know that Oedipus is old and blind? Of course she knows, but in case we didn't know that she knew, she tells us. I do not need to learn that now. Time has seen to that. So she's perfectly aware of the fact that he's blind. We know that anyway, but it's nice to have it confirmed out of her own mouth. How would she know where they have come to? What's the difference between a place and a city of men? Can there be one without the other, a place without a city without a place? Now, Oedipus goes on, before Antigone can answer, to say, who or what, tis, place or city, will welcome the wanderer Oedipus today with meager gifts. He asks for little, receives still less. This suffices me. is he like a basketball player? Does he always refer to himself in the third person by name when he begs? Of whom does he actually ask this? And Antigone can't know any more than he, so he's talking to himself. Notice in the passage I read how he moves from we to Oedipus to me. Somehow humility does not come easily to him. Things get very interesting when he turns to Antigone. If, daughter, you see any rest, any rest, either at profane places or at the groves of gods, set and establish me, so that we may learn by inquiry where we are. If it makes no difference where he's seated, why does he make the distinction between profane or holy? Why should being seated make it possible to find out where they are? Is he in fact looking for a sacred place? Oedipus says they've come as strangers to do what they are told by, Green has citizens, I changed the translation to townsmen. Now, directly after this admission of ignorance on his part, doesn't know where we are, Antigone says, there's a city far away. This is likely a sacred space. At which point Oedipus says to her, where are we? Antigone, much to our surprise, says, Athens at least, but I don't know the place. Then to our utter bewilderment, Oedipus says, everybody's told us that. So what exactly is going, where are we? I don't know. Where are we? I don't know. Where are we? Athens, at least, everybody said that. Well, I know that, but where are we? If Oedipus knew all along they were in Athens, they were in Athenian territory, why did he ask? And if his ignorance extended only to the particular place, why does he ask about the city? What city and what places have we come to? If Oedipus is if he knows he's in Athenian territory, he knows there aren't any other cities in Athenian territory, so he ought to know that they're in Athens if he's asking about the city. So the whole thing is very peculiar. Maybe his heirs should have won. If he's so willing to do what he's told, why does he disobey the very first resident of the place whom he meets? In fact, it's already clear that he intends to defy the people who live there because he asks about whether it's a profane place or a seat of the gods. The word for profane place is babela. Literally, it means that which, profane means that on which it's permitted to walk. The implication being that the sacred places are the places on which you're not permitted to walk. But he starts the play by expressing an indifference to the distinction. Sit me down somewhere. I don't care if it's sacred or profane. Now, the characteristic of these opening group of riddles is that they all turn on knowledge of place. Oide, who? From the Oedipus, the king. Know where. Knowing where you are. But it's a pun on his name, so there is a certain sense in which, in repeatedly asking after the place at the beginning, he's asking after himself. Now, we learn at the end that the place of Oedipus's disappearance is actually not known to anyone. It's supposed to be known only to Theseus, who guides him to it, but that is very suspicious since Oedipus vanishes without a trace, and Theseus, we're told, covers his eyes at the last minute. And even if Theseus knows or knew where Oedipus was buried, he was to have handed down the knowledge only to his successors, and Athens is now, when they're watching the play, a democracy, so there isn't any king. So nobody knows where Oedipus is buried. So nowhere has become nowhere. Now, if Oedipus's grave is sacred, and if sacred means not to be trod upon, not to be violated, and if no one knows where it is, it looks as though he has succeeded in making violation of the sacred inevitable through ignorance. So Oedipus himself is creating conditions at the outset of the play for others to repeat unknowingly what he does, and is about to do, knowingly at the beginning of the play, and actually, if you think back to the Oedipus Tyrannus, what he did that made him so special in the first place. It's not as though he killed his father and slept with his mother voluntarily. He did it in ignorance. He's guaranteeing that a version of what he is going to be perennially possible for every Athenian. Okay, let me stop for a second and see if anybody wants to ask anything. Okay, the stranger comes in. How does your translation refer to him? Stranger. Strange, isn't it, that the resident should be called the stranger and that I mean, it's an odd twist. The stranger forbids Oedipus to ask any more questions until he leaves the sacred place where he is. But Oedipus, being Oedipus, goes on to ask two more questions. What is the place, and sacred to which gods? So the stranger gets pulled into a conversation. He forgets his own prohibition not to speak. There's something not sacred about any questioning here, even questioning about the sacred. Who are the goddesses? At line 45 in my text, you get this. Oedipus, may I hear their sacred, or maybe their august name to pray to them. The Greek is semnon. It's important that semnai, august ones, is what the oracle called the goddesses of the place where he would end up, on the one hand, and we know from the Eumenides that semnai is the standard epithet applied to the Furies once they've become the Eumenides in Athens. But so it looks as though Oedipus is looking for an answer. He doesn't know that the semnai semnai is the way they're referred to, the Eumenides are referred to in Athens. He only knows that the oracle that he's in possession of told him that this is where he would end up. So he doesn't get the answer he wants, but then he decides it's good enough. This is the Oedipus who hasn't lost all of his assuming qualities from the Oedipus Tyrannus. Granted, he's right, but he doesn't know he's right. In any case, he hears who they are and decides to stay. He says he hopes they will be kindly Eumenides, but he'll stay even if they aren't. The stranger then decides not to move Oedipus on his own authority, so he suggests at line 55 that he will consult the polis. No, I would certainly never have the boldness to drive you out without the city's sanction until I tell them what I am doing. What city, though, is he talking about? Oedipus suggests that he sends for Theseus. So at line 70, or is it, 79, his name is Theseus, son of Aegeus, that was, can a messenger go from you to him? But What's interesting is that if you look at line 78, you get this. Remain here where I first saw you, this is the stranger, until I go and tell my fellow citizens, not those in the city, but citizens of this place. They are those to judge whether you should stay here or again take the road. So it's not Athens, it's something else. Apparently the inhabitants of Colonus have total control of this place. So is Colonus a polis? The confusion has something to do with this possibility. Is this then the moment in the history of Athens, which we're told about by the Greek historian Thucydides, Book 2, Chapter 15 following, when we're told that Theseus is the king who consolidates the towns in the area around Athens, called Attica, into one political entity. He does that by denying them political independence, but allowing them to keep their sacred places intact. So the question is, would there exist some connection between this well-known project? They didn't need Thucydides to tell them about it, this project and Oedipus. Is Theseus quite ready to allow Oedipus to remain while the elders of Colonus oppose it because he sees this as a benefit to this overall project? And question, given what we've already seen about what it is that Oedipus will bring, does Theseus's project require bringing something like permanent guilt to Athens? The necessity of transgression? Notice, by the way, that we never learn whether Ismene succeeds in performing the elaborate purification rites that Oedipus sent her to do. She's caught up by Creon. We aren't told whether that's before or after she does what he asked her to do. So he might well remain polluted until the very end. This is a big puzzle, but it's not complete yet. At line 60, we get this. What is this place on which I have set foot? He asks again what the place is. Hadn't he already asked the stranger that back on line 38? What is this place? What god is thought to possess it? In any case, the stranger gives a different answer here. Longer answer. If you listen, I will tell you whatever it is I know myself. All of this place is sacred. Our holy Lord Poseidon holds it. In it there dwells Prometheus the Titan, fire-bearing god. Within this land, Chthonios, the topos, the spot you tread on, is the bronze road. So it is called. It is the founding stone of Athens. The neighboring acres boast that their ruler is the knight Colonus, and all of the people here bear his name in common. That is how things are, sir. Here is no mere honor in speeches, but more in the sunousia, in the being together. Sunousia is a wonderful word in Greek because it literally means being with. Ousia is a version of the participle in Greek, and sun just means with. And it means here something like being together, but it comes to mean also intercourse, and then shortly you can see the jump even in English. It comes to mean sexual intercourse. Being with somebody frequently means sex, but it's also the word for lecture, in case any of you were curious about that fact. So it must be an exhilarating experience to be in a lecture which is a being with. So this land that he refers to is not identical with Colonus. It's not even clear whether it includes Colonus, since he refers to the neighboring fields as Colonus. So what's this place? It's got these bronze doors. This door sill of brass. And where does this door lead? If you look at the passage we read, and then jump ahead to what in my text is line 1590, you get this. By what manner of doom that the other died, no mortal man can say, save our Lord Theseus. It was no fiery thunderbolt of God that made away with him, nor a sea hurricane rising. No, it was some messenger sent by the gods or some power of the dead, split open the foundation, the fundament of earth with goodwill to give him painless entry. So it looks as though these are the doors to Hades. If Hades is the place where if Oedipus stays, it is apparently staying there that will be a great boon to Athens. We still don't understand what that means. Now, it's interesting that the stranger himself suggests that the being of Colonus, and so also of Athens, is in a way problematic. It's more a synousia, a being together of citizens, than it is to be identified with a place. So Oedipus claims that by staying in this place, which is not simply Athens, he grants Athens the greatest gift of his synousia. That's what he calls it at line 647. Page 110. It is here I will conquer those that cast me out. This would be a great gift of your synousia, if you stand fast by what you said and do it. The person he's speaking with at the time is Theseus. So Oedipus will somehow serve the project of Theseus and weaken the apartness of Colonus from Athens without leading to the total submerging of Colonus in Athens. The sign of this is the first stasimon. We won't read it, but if you look at the way it divides, starts at line 668, the first strophic system is a praise of Athens. The second strophic system is a praise, the first strophic system is a praise of Colonus. The second strophic system is a praise of Athens. The chorus literally puts them together, but doesn't identify them. Somehow this has to do with the distinction in the first line that your translator erased between places, regions, choroi, and city. So Oedipus, like the Furies who turn into the Eumenides, seems to point to the harnessing of the spirit of one's own, which is tied up with the family, to the polis. Athens means something like the rule of law of which Theseus is later so proud, and that in turn is linked to reason, logos. Colonus is somehow akin to an attachment to this place, this earth, and that is somehow akin to the allagon, to the irrational, to the unspeakable. But so long as the identity is maintained between Colonus, understood as place, literally hill, and Colonus, understood as a god, the horseman, and Colonus understood as a synusia of people, there's no unity possible with Athens because in a way its character as a place has been guaranteed by its attachment to a god. And you don't take that lightly, and so to become submerged in Athens is not just a political alteration, but it is in a way sacrilegious. It's a disloyalty to the gods, the God who characterizes you as who you are. Oedipus's gift to Athens is his setting out to make a separation between the people of Colonus and the place, the god. Now, the sign of this is what he does as soon as the stranger leaves. So what does he do? We're now at line 120, at more or less at 113, where we get this. I will be silent. Do you conceal me in the grove out of the way till I can find out what they will say? If we only hear what if we only hear, we can be cautious in our actions. So the stranger leaves and he immediately walks on the sacred ground. With what result? Let's look at the paradox. The chorus, the elders of, my text as chorus of old men, nobles of Athens, but it's actually elders of Attica. Look, who was he, and where does he dwell? Where has he disappeared? Where has he hurried? Man of most impious daring. Look for him, search for him, inquire everywhere. Some wandering tramp he must be, not from hereabouts, or else he had never set foot, proseba, walked forth, within this sacred grove. Of those violent virgins whom we tremble to name, whose dwelling place we pass, with no eyes to look and without voice to speak, with silent guard on lips that no words may a pious mouth sound forth. But now the story goes that someone has come who shows no reverence at all, and search as I may, I cannot see where he may be. So they come in, they can't find him. They immediately say they must neither speak nor look. But by concealing himself, Oedipus has forced them to do both. To walk on sacred ground, to look, and to see. He's forced them to commit his crime. They say he's guilty of trespass and reveres nothing, and that he must be ignorant and is therefore innocent. So it's like his own experience of his own crimes, incest and parricide. He forces them to understand this doubleness. He's guilty, but it isn't his fault. They're guilty, but it isn't their fault. He's forced them to do it while they are knowingly committing a crime of their own. The point seems to be this, or the provisional point, that Sophocles has put two things together, and we need to understand why. The founding of Athens and the institutionalizing of guilt, loss of innocence. Now, one last thing before we stop. Sophocles seems preoccupied with this question of the political. Why? In Aristotle's Politics, Aristotle's famous for having claimed that political life is natural. Politics is natural because logos is natural to human beings. The whole of the first book of the Politics is somehow an articulation of this. On the other hand, in the very first line of the Politics, Aristotle says that he has to give an account of how the polis was instituted. So he says two things. He says that it's natural and that it's instituted. And those two things don't seem to go easily together, because you would think that if it was natural, it would happen by itself, like a flower growing. It wouldn't have to have somebody set it up. As soon as human beings make it, it looks as though that's exactly what we mean by artifice, that it's artificial. So somehow Aristotle captures in this one line, at the first line of the Politics, the strangeness of our condition. We make conventions naturally. We're by nature the speaking animals, the animals with logos. We're the zoon logikon, but we don't speak language. We speak French or Turkish or Persian or whatever. We speak languages, specific languages, which are all to some extent or another conventional, and we know that. So, I mean, the word ou in Greek means not, and in French it means where. So you compare the two languages and you say, oh, that's strange. So on the one hand, we are by nature something, but the thing we are by nature looks as though it is conventional. We're political animals by nature. This Aristotle connects with our being the rational animals. We have speech. We talk to each other. We are the being, so on the one hand, there's something intrinsically social about speech. You don't need it if you're a solitary being. So we have speech that's connected to our being political. At the same time, we're the beings, we've seen this already in Aristotle's Poetics, we're the beings who say X is Y. What are we doing when we do that? We say, the fruit is sweet. And we have just discovered this fact. We're putting two things together. It looks like we're doing the putting of the two things together. We put things together by nature, but we do that so as to explain to ourselves that and how they're already together. We just didn't know that they were together. But the speech gives voice to the fact, to their togetherness, to the synousia. So, and this is too short to be more than just a hint, concentrating on the political, which Sophocles has done in these last two plays, means in a way concentrating on what is uniquely human. And what is uniquely human is being by nature conventional, which means being by nature, for example, being by nature a speaker of language, but this nature can only show itself, articulate itself, by speaking a conventional language. There is no speaker of language in the world. There is no zoon logikon. There's no political animal. There's a member of the city of Athens, citizen of Athens, or Colonus. So this strange, very strange combination of the conventional and the natural is in some way what Sophocles is after in this preoccupation with politics and the political. Very important for us. Every age has its taken for grantedness, things that it says and doesn't really know what it's talking about most of the time, but it's just, and it's interesting that they're frequently the things that we pride ourselves most on when we think how deep we are. one of the ways we pride ourselves, we sort of place ourselves far above previous generations and say, oh, we're aware of the fact that all value is relative, that all culture is relative. You know, you can fill in the blanks. You've heard this 100,000 times. We are not as accustomed to ask ourselves, okay, you put it in this way. Yes, it is true that our notions of good and bad, beautiful and ugly, just and unjust, and the rest, vary considerably from time to time and place to place. But isn't it amazing that wherever you have human beings, you have notions of beautiful and ugly, just and unjust, good and bad? That's a big deal. That's like saying, you know, we've grown up, we don't any longer have, you know, we don't any longer bow down before gods. It's interesting. Nietzsche says somewhere, I think it's in Zarathustra somewhere, but I may be inventing this. Not that he said it, but that he said it in Best Book, Zarathustra, that you understand a human being by understanding what God it is he bows down before. And that's really interesting because it looks as though there's great disagreement about what is holy. But it's very unclear that you ever find a human society anywhere that doesn't bow down before something for which nothing is holy. We think of ourselves in that way, but when you think about it for a minute, you realize that we think of ourselves that way and pride ourselves so much on that it's a way of understanding what we think of as holy. It's like this, I mentioned this before when we were reading, forget which play it was. Think about it, though. The Athenians are so proud of the fact that Greeks exercise naked. There's something liberating about that. They understand the beauty of the human body and that the other nations and cities all wear different kinds of clothing, and you can tell who they are on the basis of what the clothing is that they wear. That's how it's like the language they speak. And then it turns out that this naked exercise, which is what gymnasia means really, this naked exercise is what the Athenians pride themselves so highly on. So it's performing for them the same function as clothing performs for everybody else. It separates them from everyone else. So it looks as though these issues are all in some way connected together. And when Sophocles has, we haven't seen all of it yet, but Sophocles has noticed that this is, in a way, a universal feature of human beings, and therefore, in a way, a natural feature of human beings, and really very worth understanding. When Aristotle says that poetry is more philosophical than history, and then sort of takes it back, but still, when he first says it, he means to say that poetry is more philosophical because, although it deals in the particular, it deals in the particular as universal. So imagine yourself now in a poetry workshop, and you're reading a poem that you've written. What's the point of reading the poem that you've written if it's only an authentic expression of your own experience and reactions to things? It might be good for you, I suppose, but why the hell should your friends care about it? Unless there's something in it that touches them, that reaches across the boundary between you and them, you have to have turned your individual experience into something that's worth sharing. And if it's worth sharing, it's talking about more than you. And if it's talking about more than you, it's using the particular in the way poetic images always do to get something beyond the mere particular. Similarly, you could say the study of culture, well worth doing in order to notice differences. If you're really only interested in it for differences, it's sort of unclear why you should study it. It's like the old person who collects junk and just shoves it in their apartment. If it's just particulars, it's kind of just junk. For you, it's not a part of you. So what's it for? Well, it's meant to teach you something. But it's meant to teach you something. It's meant to point you to things that aren't merely particular. Same thing about study of various languages. Goethe has this marvelous remark in his conversations with Eckermann that you don't really understand what a language is until you learn a second one. Now, I'm not sure Socrates knew a second language, so I'm not sure that it's universally true, but I am sure that what Goethe was getting at was, as long as you are only a German speaker, you run the risk of assuming that language is German. And everything else that you hear is sort of ba, 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 ba. It's the barbarian speaking, but that's not real language. Real language is Greek. The mistake there is that you're connecting, you're identifying logos with Greek. And that means you're identifying the conventions in which you have been raised with nature. And that's a mistake. Seeing that there's a difference is the first step toward thinking. It's what philosophy really requires, that you understand the tension between the natural and the conventional. Even if you don't understand where it's going, you've got to see it, see that there's a difference. And that means that smart anthropology has to simultaneously think about particularity and universality. Smart poetry has to be simultaneously about the particular and the universal. Anything that has to do with thought can't force itself simply to be concerned with the particular. Yeah, although they can't know that. I mean, they've just wandered in. And so I think the talk about, the confusion about where they are is Sophocles' way of forcing you to realize just that there are many ways of answering the question, where are we? And that's a sign that there's on the one hand Athens, the city that's far off. There's on the other hand the region of Attica. These cities all share mostly a common dialect and a common area. That's why Theseus can even think about unifying them. There's the particular little town, Colonus. And then there's this space that they're in that isn't actually in Colonus, but is somehow maybe connected to Colonus. And that has and then there are places that for some reason are called sacred, and other places that don't look so different that are for some reason not. So he takes you through this apparently, when you read it, sort of funny series of questions and answers. Where are we? Where are we? Where are we? To show you that you don't really know where you are unless you know what sort of place you're looking for. And that initial distinction that is erased in your translation between choroi, places, and city of what people points to the crucial distinction that he's making. So I don't think I've done anything, don't imagine that I even think that I've done anything but sort of repeat in different words what I already said. But I do think that it's there to force you to realize that there's a big question that we take for granted, that we know the answer to, that is very, very complicated. The question of place isn't as easy as we customarily think of it as being. We may pick up evidence as we go along. I've forgotten, but I don't think we pick up much evidence. I think that Eteocles and Polynices are pretty old already, although that we don't see them or hear of them. His daughters seem to be younger at the end of Oedipus, the king, although we don't really know how old they are, and Antigone seems to be, I mean, if I were to guess, it's hard to, and we're not given an indication, but she looks, late teens, wouldn't you think? In the beginning of it, she's pretty competent, and she's a little fed up with him, and so she's not a 9-year-old, I would guess, but I think your question is one of those questions that everybody's got to have a hunch about, but then when push comes to shove, you say to yourself, why are we deprived of this information? Because I don't think we know how long it's been. So I may have given you this example before, but in Plato's dialogue, the Phaedo, which is a dialogue on the day that Socrates dies, he's going to take the poison because he's been convicted of this crime of corrupting the young and not believing in the gods. The Phaedo is a dialogue that actually has a frame where Phaedo, someone who is present at Socrates' death, is relating what happened to a man who's asked about it, a man named Echecrates. If you look at the frame, you realize that although Echecrates is from Phlius, we're never told where the conversation takes place between Phaedo and Echecrates. And we're never told how much time has elapsed, although Phaedo is still alive. So, it could be 2 weeks, it could be 3 years, it could be 20 years, we just don't know. And you're annoyed by that because you'd like a little more detail. And then as you go on, you discover that the conversation on the last day of Socrates' death was all about the immortality of the soul, which on the surface he works out in perfect, it looks like it works, but in fact, it's riddled with problems, and he knows it's riddled with problems. So if you're reading carefully, you come out with some doubts about the personal immortality of personal soul. And so you begin looking for other options. And one of the options you're offered is, well, you live on. How? Well, people hear about you. So yes, Phaedo and Echecrates are talking about Socrates at an indeterminate time after his death and at an indeterminate place. So maybe it's Bronxville in 2018. Maybe that's the time and place. You see, there is a kind of suggestion of a possibility of immortality by way of being remembered, and writing as the means of making someone remembered. That's all under the table. I mean, that's never made explicit, but unless you allow yourself to be frustrated by the fact that you don't know how long and where, you're not led to think about the problem of how long and where, which means the whole question of Bronxville in 2018 is not visible to you. So my suggestion, it's only a suggestion, it doesn't always work, but in a good author, when you run into a problem that keeps resisting you because you're simply not given enough information to settle it, but you are given enough information to wonder about it, maybe the fact that you're wondering about it is what you're supposed to be wondering about. That's the issue. So I would push that in this play if I were you. Why is indeterminate time why is indeterminate time crucial in this analysis? Let's take the easiest case first. So if you read Euripides' Electra, and you see that he's making fun of certain suggestions that the old tutor of Orestes is making about how you might why you might conclude that Orestes has come to Argos. And then you look at them and you realize these are exactly the things in the recognition scene in Aeschylus's Libation Bearers, then you cannot resist making the comparison because Euripides has forced you to think about the Libation Bearers. So there are those sorts of references in literature that you can't ignore and you shouldn't ignore because, in fact, they're built into the text you're reading as references. Now, this play is harder because it's not quite as clear that they're references, but it's so tempting and it's so that I think that it needs to be experimented with. You need to think about what's going on in the Eumenides and think about whether it is applicable to what you're learning in this play. But you need to be careful because Sophocles doesn't demand you do it in the same way that Euripides demands that you do it. And I think that he does provide within his own play sufficient evidence, sufficient argument, sufficient justification for, in other words, the play fits together as a whole. You should always turn to the evidence that's presented in this play and try to work it out in terms of the evidence that's presented in this play. And then you'd be an idiot if you didn't really, I mean, since you've been thinking about the Eumenides and the issues are so close, I knew that beforehand, by the way, I think that you'd be crazy not to try to ask what the connection is between the two. But be careful. First time through, when you're drawing conclusions about what Sophocles is doing, try to make sure that you're using the evidence that Sophocles has provided before you jump to Oedipus. Now, I cheated already. I said it's well known that, and we know through the Eumenides that they are called the Semnae, the august ones. I don't think I needed that in order to make the argument that I made today. You only need to see that Oedipus asked about used this word to ask about who they were, and that he got another reply with which he was satisfied.